During salary negotiations, my manager said I was replaceable, until my replacement quit on day one. I was staring at the resignation letter on my desk when my phone buzzed with a message from HR. Your replacement just walked out. Need you back immediately. Name your price. That was 3 hours after I'd cleaned out my cubicle. 3 hours after my manager told me I was easily replaceable, during what I thought would be a standard salary negotiation. 3 hours after I'd discovered that sometimes the only way to prove your worth is to let them try to replace you. Let me back up 6 months. I'd been the senior systems architect at Velocity Tech Solutions for 5 years, managing the entire infrastructure for a company that processed financial transactions for mid-sized businesses across the eastern seaboard. Not glamorous work, but critical. The kind of job where if I did everything perfectly, nobody noticed. But if one server went down at 3 a.m., my phone would explode with calls from executives whose bonuses depended on uptime. I'd built the system from scratch when the company had 30 employees. Now we had 300, and every single one of them depended on my architecture staying functional. My annual review had been glowing. Exceptional performance. Critical to operations. The usual corporate praise that feels good until you realize it doesn't translate to your paycheck. I'd been making $82,000 a year in a market where my skill set commanded at least $110,000. I knew it. My manager, David Thornton, knew it. But knowing something and doing something about it are different animals entirely. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in David's corner office, the one with the view of the parking lot and the motivational poster about teamwork that nobody read. I'd prepared a document outlining my contributions, market salary data, and a modest request for a 20% increase that would still leave me below market rate. Professional, reasonable, backed by data. I'd practiced my pitch, anticipated objections, prepared responses. I walked in feeling confident, dressed in my best button-down shirt, carrying a leather portfolio my wife had bought me for my birthday. David was already sitting behind his desk, not even bothering to look up from his laptop when I entered. "Have a seat, Nathan," he said, his voice carrying that peculiar blend of boredom and condescension that middle managers perfect after years of soul-crushing meetings. I sat down, placed my portfolio on my lap, and waited for him to finish typing whatever email was apparently more important than the meeting he'd scheduled. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a minute. Small power play. I'd seen him do it before with vendors and contractors. Finally, he looked up, interlaced his fingers on the desk, and smiled that tight smile that never reached his eyes. "So, Nathan, you wanted to discuss compensation?" I nodded, opened my portfolio, and slid the document across his desk. He glanced at it for maybe 5 seconds, not even pretending to read the salary comparisons I'd spent hours compiling. "I see you've done your homework," he said, pushing the paper back toward me with one finger like it was contaminated. "Here's the thing. The company appreciates your work. Really, we do. But a 20% increase? That's not realistic given current budget constraints." I'd expected pushback. That's negotiation. What I hadn't expected was what came next. David leaned back in his chair, that smile widening into something almost predatory. "Let me be frank with you. You're good at what you do, but you're not irreplaceable. There are a dozen qualified candidates out there who could do your job for less money. Maybe even do it better, with fresh perspectives and new ideas." The words hit like a physical blow. Not irreplaceable. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands grip the edge of the portfolio until my knuckles went white. "I built this entire system from the ground up," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "Nobody knows it like I do. The documentation is incomplete because you keep cutting my requests for technical writing support." David shrugged, a casual gesture that conveyed just how little my 5 years of 80-hour weeks and middle-of-the-night emergency responses meant to him. "Documentation can be written. Systems can be learned. What I'm offering is a 5% cost of living adjustment. Take it or leave it." 5%. $4,000 before taxes. An insult dressed up as a compromise. I did the math in my head instantly. That would bring me to $86,000, still $24,000 below market rate. Still undervalued, underpaid, and clearly unappreciated. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to negotiate further, to explain the specific knowledge I possessed, the institutional memory that couldn't be replaced with a job posting and a 3-month training period. But the part of me that had spent 5 years being taken for granted, working weekends while David golfed with clients, fixing disasters caused by his terrible decisions while he took credit in board meetings, that part of me made a different choice entirely. I stood up, collected my portfolio, and looked David directly in the eyes. "I'll make this simple for you. I quit. Effective immediately. You can find one of those dozen qualified candidates and pay them whatever you think I'm worth." The color drained from David's face so fast I almost laughed. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Now hold on. Let's not be hasty. We can discuss this." But I was already walking toward the door, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Nothing to discuss. You made it clear where I stand. I'm easily replaceable, remember? Good luck with the replacement." I walked out of his office, down the corridor past the cubicles where my co-workers sat oblivious to the bomb I'd just detonated, and straight to HR. Angela Morrison from HR, I'll call her Angela M since that's relevant later, looked up from her computer with a startled expression when I walked in without an appointment. "Nathan, everything okay?" She was nice enough, mid-50s, had been with the company since the beginning. I'd helped her recover her email account at least 6 times over the years. "I need to submit my resignation," I said, pulling out my phone and opening a template I'd saved months ago in a moment of frustrated fantasy. I filled in the date, sent it to the wireless printer in the corner, and handed her the still warm paper. Effective immediately. Angela's eyes went wide as she scanned the single paragraph. Oh no. Did something happen with David? I gave her the abbreviated version while she processed the paperwork. She kept shaking her head, muttering about poor management and retention problems. "I have to ask you to reconsider," she said, which was her job, but her heart wasn't in it. "You know how important you are to operations. Important enough to underpay by 30% and tell me I'm replaceable, apparently. But I kept that thought to myself. My decision is final. I'll clean out my desk and return my access badge and laptop." The next hour was surreal. I packed 5 years of my professional life into a cardboard box from the supply closet. A coffee mug with a programming joke my wife didn't find funny. A photo of us at the beach. Technical manuals I'd purchased with my own money because the company wouldn't buy them. A stress ball that had seen better days. Coworkers stopped by, confused by the sudden departure. I kept my explanations vague. Personal decision. Time for a change. Better opportunity. Nobody needed to know that I'd just called David's bluff in the most spectacular way possible. As I carried the box to my car, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I had a mortgage, 2 car payments, a wife who'd just started her own business and wasn't bringing in steady income yet. I'd just quit without another job lined up, on principle, because a mediocre manager had insulted me. I sat in my Toyota Camry in the parking lot, hands shaking as the adrenaline wore off and reality set in. What had I just done? My phone buzzed. A text from my wife, Olivia. "How did the meeting go?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Instead, I started the engine and drove home, practicing different ways to explain to my wife that I'd just blown up our financial security over wounded pride and a point of principle. The conversation did not go as badly as I'd feared. Olivia listened to the whole story while we sat at our kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold during my explanation. When I finished, expecting anger or panic, she reached across and squeezed my hand. "Good," she said simply. "You've been miserable there for 2 years. I was wondering when you'd finally have enough." Her support meant everything, but it didn't pay the bills. I spent the rest of Thursday evening updating my resume and reaching out to my network. By Friday morning, I had 3 phone screens scheduled with recruiters. By Friday afternoon, I had 2 on-site interviews lined up for the following week. The market for senior systems architects was even hotter than I'd thought. Turns out when you're actually good at what you do, replaceable is a relative term. Meanwhile, back at Velocity Tech, chaos was apparently brewing. I learned this through Alex Brennan, a junior developer who reported to me and had become a friend over the years. He texted me Friday evening. "Dude, what happened? David's freaking out. Called an emergency meeting and said we need to hire your replacement immediately." I smiled at my phone. Let him freak out. Saturday, I went hiking with Olivia, deliberately leaving my work phone at home. Sunday, I meal prepped and watched football. Monday morning, I had my first interview with a fintech startup in the city. They offered me $125,000 on the spot, pending references. I asked for time to consider, which in retrospect was playing it cool to an absurd degree, considering I'd been unemployed for 4 days. Monday afternoon, Alex texted again. They hired someone. Some guy named Richard Grayson who supposedly worked at a big firm in Boston. Starts tomorrow. David's acting like he just won the lottery. Richard Grayson. I didn't recognize the name, but Boston had good tech talent. Maybe David had actually found someone qualified. A small part of me felt a twinge of doubt. Maybe I had been replaceable after all. That doubt lasted approximately 18 hours. Wednesday morning, my phone exploded. Not literally, but close enough. 7 missed calls from the office number, 3 from David's cell, 2 from Angela M. in HR, a dozen texts from various coworkers, and then the one that made me laugh out loud while eating breakfast. Alex. "Dude, your replacement quit. Just walked out. David is losing his mind. Servers are down. Nobody knows what to do. This is insane." I read the message 3 times, slowly, savoring each word like expensive wine. Then I checked the other messages. David had left a voicemail, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Nathan, it's David. We need to talk. Call me back immediately." Another voicemail from Angela M. "Nathan, this is Angela from HR. We'd like to discuss the possibility of you returning to Velocity Tech. Please call me when you get this." And then, the crown jewel, a text message from David himself. "Your replacement just walked out. Need you back immediately. Name your price." I took a screenshot. Then I took another one just to be sure. Olivia came into the kitchen, saw my face, and immediately knew something significant had happened. "What?" I showed her the messages. She read them, eyes widening, and then she started laughing. Full belly laughs that made her double over. Oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen." I called Alex first, because I needed to understand what had actually happened before I responded to David or HR. Alex answered on the first ring, speaking in a rushed whisper like he was hiding in a bathroom stall. Nathan, it's a disaster. Richard showed up yesterday morning, David gave him a quick tour, and then basically pointed him at your old desk and said, figure it out. No proper handoff, no documentation review, nothing. Richard spent the day clicking around the admin panels looking confused. This morning, the payment processing server went down. Completely down. Transactions failing left and right. Richard panicked, started randomly restarting services, and made it worse. Way worse. Corrupted the database backup. David came in screaming about how this was unacceptable, and Richard just stood up, said, I didn't sign up for this disaster, and walked out. Just left. Didn't even clock out. It's been 3 hours and nothing is working. I felt a savage satisfaction that probably wasn't entirely healthy, but I embraced it anyway. Where's David now? Alex laughed. A slightly hysterical sound. In his office with the door closed, making phone calls, the CEO just showed up. This is bad, Nathan. Really bad. Clients are calling. We're losing money by the minute. I thanked Alex and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table and thought very carefully about my next move. The rational choice was to leverage this situation into a better position. David was desperate. The company was bleeding money. I had all the power now. I could name my price, demand the respect I'd always deserved, and walk back in as the hero who saved the day. But there was another option. A petty, vindictive option that appealed to the part of me that was still furious about being called replaceable. I could let them burn. Watch David fail spectacularly. Let the consequences of his arrogance play out in real time. Except that would hurt people who didn't deserve it. The junior developers who relied on the system I'd built. The clients whose businesses depended on our uptime. Angela M. in HR, who'd always been kind to me. Revenge that hurt innocent people wasn't revenge. It was just cruelty. So I chose a middle path. I called Angela M. back first, not David. She answered immediately, relief flooding her voice. Nathan, thank God. We need you back. Whatever it takes. I kept my voice professional, friendly even, but firm. I'm willing to discuss a contract position to fix the immediate crisis. Consultant rate. $150 per hour, minimum 8-hour billing per day, regardless of actual hours worked. Payment in advance for the first week. And I want David in the room when we negotiate terms. There was a pause. Angela was doing the math. $1,200 per day. $6,000 for the week. More than I'd made in 2 weeks as an employee. I'll need to run this by leadership, she said carefully. Run it by whoever you need to. But I have an interview at 2 o'clock today with another company. If I don't hear back by 1, I'm going to assume you're not interested. It was a bluff. My interview was actually at 4, but she didn't know that. I'll call you back within the hour, Angela promised. She called back in 45 minutes. We accept your terms. Can you come in today? I smiled. Not yet. One more card to play. I'll come in tomorrow morning at 8. I need the payment for the first week wired to my account by end of business today. And I want the contract in writing, signed by David and someone from the executive team. Another pause. More frantic discussion in the background. Done. I'll email you the contract within the hour. The wire transfer will go out by 4. I hung up and sat back, feeling the sweet taste of vindication. Replaceable. Right. The contract arrived at 11:30. I read through it carefully. Had Olivia read it? She'd done contract law in a previous career, and sent back 2 minor revisions. By 1 o'clock, we had a signed agreement. By 4:30, $6,000 hit my bank account. Thursday morning, I walked back into Velocity Tech Solutions with my laptop bag over my shoulder, wearing jeans and a t-shirt instead of business casual, because contractors don't follow the dress code. The receptionist, Monica, did a double take when she saw me. Nathan, I thought you quit. I smiled. I did. Now I'm a consultant. Is the conference room available? She nodded, still looking confused, and I made my way to the largest conference room, the one usually reserved for client meetings. I set up my laptop, plugged into the projector, and waited. At exactly 8 o'clock, David walked in. He looked terrible. Bags under his eyes, coffee-stained shirt, the defeated posture of a man who'd spent the last 24 hours in crisis mode. Behind him came someone I didn't recognize initially. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit. Then it clicked. Lawrence Pemberton, CEO. I'd seen him maybe 3 times in 5 years, always from a distance. Mr. Pemberton, I said, standing and extending my hand. Nathan Cooper, thank you for coming. Lawrence shook my hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive, the handshake of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms. Nathan, I've been hearing a lot about you in the last 48 hours. All of it good, I should say. Wish we'd met under better circumstances. David remained silent, standing slightly behind Lawrence like a scolded child. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically it was almost funny. Let's get the system back online, I said, pulling up my diagnostics dashboard. Then we can talk about long-term solutions. What followed was 3 hours of intensive work. The damage Richard had done was worse than Alex had described. Not only had he corrupted the backup, but his panicked restarts had triggered a cascade of dependency failures that had spread through the entire infrastructure. It was like watching someone try to fix a car engine by hitting it with a hammer. I worked methodically, documenting each issue, explaining what had gone wrong and why. Lawrence watched, asking intelligent questions. David said nothing, just stood there witnessing the dismantling of his easily replaceable narrative in real time. By 11 o'clock, I had the payment processing server back online. By noon, all systems were functional. By 1 o'clock, I'd implemented temporary safeguards to prevent similar failures. I saved all my work, backed up the fixes, and turned to face Lawrence and David. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. The immediate crisis is resolved, I said. But you have bigger problems. Your infrastructure is fragile because it's underdocumented and depends on institutional knowledge that walked out the door when I quit. You need either a comprehensive documentation project or a senior architect who understands the system. Preferably both. Lawrence nodded slowly. What would you recommend? This was the moment to press my advantage, to demand everything I wanted and more. I looked at David, who couldn't meet my eyes. Then I looked back at Lawrence. I recommend you hire a new senior systems architect at market rate, someone good, and give them the resources to properly document and modernize the infrastructure. I can consult on the transition, help bring them up to speed, but I'm not interested in coming back as an employee. Lawrence's eyebrows rose. May I ask why not? I chose my words carefully. Because I was told I was easily replaceable, and when I tested that theory, the replacement quit after one day. I don't think this is the right culture fit for me long term. The silence in that conference room was deafening. David's face went from pale to red. Lawrence turned to look at him with an expression that could freeze nitrogen. Is that true? Lawrence asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Did you tell Nathan he was easily replaceable during a salary negotiation? David opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. It was taken out of context. I was trying to explain budget constraints. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app where I'd written down David's exact words immediately after leaving his office, and read them aloud. There are a dozen qualified candidates out there who could do your job for less money, maybe even do it better, with fresh perspectives and new ideas. I looked up. Does that sound out of context to you, Mr. Pemberton? Lawrence's jaw tightened. He turned to David. My office. Now. Nathan, please stay here. I'll be back in 10 minutes. They left. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see them walk down the corridor, David trailing behind Lawrence like a man heading to his execution. I sat down, pulled out my phone, and texted Olivia. You're not going to believe what's happening. 10 minutes turned into 20. When Lawrence returned, he was alone. He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. First, I want to apologize on behalf of Velocity Tech Solutions. What happened during your salary negotiation was unacceptable. David has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral even though I was internally celebrating. Second, I'd like to make you an offer. Not to return as an employee, since you've made your position clear, but as a long-term consultant. I need someone who can architect a proper succession plan, document the infrastructure, and help us hire and train your eventual replacement. Name your rate. Name your terms. I'm willing to negotiate anything that keeps you involved with this company in some capacity. This was better than I'd imagined. Better than any revenge fantasy. I thought about it for 30 seconds, then gave him my counteroffer. $175 per hour. Minimum 20 hours per week for the next 6 months. Flexible schedule. I work remotely unless an on-site presence is absolutely necessary. You hire a technical writer to work with me on documentation, and I have final say on who you hire as the new senior systems architect. Lawrence didn't even hesitate. Done. I'll have the contract drawn up by end of day tomorrow. We shook hands. As I packed up my laptop, Lawrence stood and walked to the door, then paused and turned back. Nathan, can I ask you something off the record? I nodded. When David told you that you were replaceable, why didn't you try to negotiate further? Why quit immediately? I thought about how to answer that. Because someone who says that to a loyal employee doesn't respect them. And I've learned that respect is non-negotiable. It's easier to teach skills than to teach someone to value other people. Lawrence nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he already suspected. David's been with us for 8 years. Good numbers, but I've had concerns about his management style. This is the push I needed to take action. Thank you for that. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, processing everything that had just happened. Less than a week ago, I'd been an underpaid, underappreciated employee being told I was easily replaceable. Now I was a consultant making triple my previous rate, with a 6-month contract and effective veto power over my replacement. The irony was almost too perfect. I sent a text to Alex. Systems are back up. I'll be consulting for a while. Your nightmare is over. His response was immediate. You're a legend. Everyone's talking about what happened. David just cleaned out his office. I drove home and found Olivia in her home office, working on her business. When I told her about the contract, the rate, and David being placed on leave, she actually whooped with joy and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I'm so proud of you, she said. You stood up for yourself, and it actually worked out. Do you know how rare that is? I did. I really did. That evening, I accepted the offer from the fintech startup as well. 125,000 salary, full benefits, and a hybrid schedule that let me work from home 3 days a week. Between the consulting contract and the new job, I'd more than doubled my previous income. And unlike before, I was working with people who valued my expertise. The next 6 months were busy, but satisfying. I worked mornings at the fintech startup, building their infrastructure from scratch with proper documentation and redundancy. Afternoons and evenings, I consulted for Velocity Tech, creating detailed technical documentation and interviewing candidates for my replacement. I rejected 5 candidates before I found the right one. Jennifer Kowalski, a senior architect from Chicago with 15 years of experience and a no-nonsense attitude I immediately respected. I spent 3 months training her, walking her through every system, every quirk, every late-night fix I'd implemented over the years. She was sharp, asked good questions, and most importantly, she took nothing for granted. By month 4, she was handling incidents independently. By month 5, she was proposing improvements. By month 6, she didn't need me anymore. Meanwhile, David's administrative leave became a quiet termination. I heard through the grapevine that he'd been asked to resign and took a severance package rather than face a formal review of his management practices. Part of me felt bad for him, a very small part. The rest of me remembered sitting in his office being told I was replaceable and felt nothing but satisfaction. The official story was that he was pursuing other opportunities. Lawrence Pemberton sent me a handwritten note thanking me for my professionalism during the transition. It's framed on my office wall now. On my last day as a consultant, Jennifer took me out for lunch. We sat in a small bistro downtown, and she raised her glass of iced tea. To the guy who built something good and had the guts to walk away from people who didn't appreciate it. I clinked my glass against hers. To the person who'll make it even better. As we ate, she asked me the question I'd been waiting for. Do you regret quitting? Even for a moment? I thought about it, honestly. No. Best decision I ever made. Sometimes you have to call someone's bluff to find out what you're really worth. She nodded, then leaned forward with a conspiratorial grin. Want to know something funny? When I interviewed with Lawrence, he told me the position opened because the previous architect was irreplaceable and they didn't realize it until he was gone. Said it was the most expensive lesson he'd ever learned. I laughed. Actually laughed, loud enough that other diners turned to look. Irreplaceable. The exact opposite of what David had said. Did he tell you what the lesson cost them? Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed me a spreadsheet. I did the math. Between lost revenue during downtime, emergency consulting fees, the hiring process, and my significantly higher salary than what you were making, they spent approximately $430,000 to learn that you weren't replaceable. $430,000. More than 5 times my old annual salary. The number was almost incomprehensible. And that's not counting the damage to client relationships or the cost of David's severance, Jennifer added. All because he was too cheap and too arrogant to give you a 20% raise. We finished lunch, exchanged contact information, and promised to stay in touch. As I drove home that final day, I reflected on everything that had happened. The anger, the fear, the vindication, the unexpected opportunities. Most revenge fantasies are just that, fantasies. But sometimes, very rarely, the universe delivers justice so perfect you couldn't have scripted it better. That evening, Olivia and I celebrated with expensive takeout and cheap wine, because we were still adjusting to having money but hadn't developed expensive taste yet. As we sat on our couch, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. You know what the best part of this whole thing is? I raised an eyebrow. The money? The vindication? David getting fired? She shook her head. The fact that you didn't go back, even when they offered. You could have leveraged the situation into a big raise and gone back as an employee. But you chose something better. You chose respect. She was right. The consulting contract paid well, but it expired. The real win was the fintech job, where I worked with people who valued expertise and treated employees like assets instead of expenses. A place where my ideas were heard, my skills were appreciated, and nobody would ever call me replaceable. 3 months after my consulting contract ended, Alex reached out with interesting news. Velocity Tech had been acquired by a larger firm. Lawrence had stepped down with a generous exit package. Jennifer was thriving as head of infrastructure, and the new corporate owners had implemented a comprehensive employee retention program after reviewing why so many senior people had left in the previous year. Turns out I wasn't the only one David had driven away with his management style. I was just the one whose departure broke everything. A year after I quit, I was promoted to principal architect at the fintech startup. My salary hit $150,000. I had a team of 5 engineers reporting to me. I spoke at conferences. I'd become the kind of professional I'd always wanted to be, but couldn't achieve at Velocity Tech, because David had kept me in a box, underpaid and undervalued, assuming I'd never leave. Sometimes former colleagues from Velocity Tech would reach out on LinkedIn, asking for job referrals or advice. I helped when I could, because they weren't the problem. David was the problem. And David, according to Alex's occasional updates, was having a harder time finding his next position. Turns out when you lose a company $400,000 because you told a critical employee they were replaceable, that kind of thing gets around in professional circles. Not from me. I never badmouthed him publicly. But Lawrence had been asked for references by potential employers, and Lawrence, being honest to a fault, had apparently given a very detailed account of what had happened. The tech industry is smaller than people think. Reputations matter. I never regretted my decision, not once. Even during the scary first week when I was unemployed with no backup plan. Even during the exhausting months of juggling 2 jobs. Because here's what I learned. Your value isn't determined by what someone is willing to pay you. It's determined by what you're willing to walk away from when you're not paid what you're worth. The story should have ended there. Neat narrative arc, satisfying conclusion, lessons learned, but life doesn't tie itself up in bow-wrapped packages. 6 months ago, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, I owe you an apology. I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. It was from David. The email was long, rambling, and surprisingly honest. He'd spent the year since Velocity Tech in therapy, working through what he called significant issues with ego and control. He'd realized, with professional help, that his management style had been driven by his own insecurities, his fear that if his employees were too competent, they'd make him look unnecessary. So he'd kept good people down, paid them poorly, and convinced himself they were lucky to have jobs at all. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't ask for a reference or a job lead, just wanted me to know that he understood what he'd done wrong, that he was working on becoming a better person, and that he was genuinely sorry for how he'd treated me and others. I read the email 3 times, trying to decide how I felt. Angry? Vindicated? Sympathetic? Eventually, I settled on something closer to pity, mixed with hope. I wrote back a short response. I appreciate the apology. I hope you find peace and become the manager someone deserves to work for. He replied immediately. I don't know if I'll ever manage people again, but if I do, I'll remember this. Thank you for not being cruel when you had every right to be. And that was it. Closure I didn't know I needed. The vindication had been satisfying. The financial success was rewarding. But the real victory was knowing that maybe, possibly, something good had come from the whole disaster. Maybe David would actually change. Maybe the next person who worked for him wouldn't be told they were replaceable. Maybe I'd altered the trajectory of someone's career for the better by standing up for myself. Last month, I was invited to speak at a technology leadership conference. The topic was employee retention and the true cost of undervaluing talent. I told my story, edited slightly for time and privacy. I talked about the importance of paying people what they're worth, of respecting institutional knowledge, of understanding that some things genuinely are irreplaceable until you try to replace them and everything falls apart. During the Q&A session, a young manager asked, but what if you can't afford to pay everyone what they're worth? What if the budget just isn't there? I thought about that carefully before answering. Then you're honest about it. You say, I can't give you what you deserve right now, but I'm fighting for you, and here's my plan to get you there. You don't insult people's worth or imply they're lucky to have a job, because budgets can change, but once you lose someone's respect and trust, you rarely get it back. The room was quiet. Someone started clapping, then everyone else joined in. After my talk, at least a dozen people came up to share their own stories of being undervalued, of walking away, of finding better opportunities after being told they were replaceable. Each story reinforced what I'd learned. You are never just your job. You are never just what someone is willing to pay you. You have value that exists independent of any employer's assessment. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who can't see it. Today, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, working with people who value me, earning what I'm worth, building things that matter. And every single day, when I log into my systems at the fintech company, I remember that moment in David's office. The moment he told me I was replaceable. The moment I decided to test that theory. The moment that changed everything. If you're reading this and you're in a job where you're undervalued, underpaid, and unappreciated, I can't tell you what to do. Everyone's situation is different. Financial obligations, family responsibilities, market conditions, they all matter. But I can tell you this, you are not replaceable. You are unique, with specific skills and knowledge that took years to develop. And if someone can't see that, if someone tells you otherwise, maybe it's time to let them try to replace you and see what happens. Sometimes the only way to prove your worth is to walk away. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe delivers the perfect ending where everyone learns exactly what they needed to learn. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.